one of the most difficult passages in the entire Tanakh, in the entire Bible, is where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. People are morally outraged by the idea. They associate it with ancient human sacrifice, which is savage, barbarian, immoral, criminal, and fattening. It's got everything wrong with it. And I can't imagine how there could be such an incident in our literature. Now, what I propose to do is go through the passage. I can't explain every detail in every verse, but there are a number of details that can be explained, and they have independent interest. By way of familiarizing you with the story, that'll probably take 2 days or so, and then I'll address the philosophical question of how God could possibly command human sacrifice. Okay, so it starts, and it happened after these things that God tested Abraham. He said to Abraham, and replied, "Here I am." Now, God is going to ask Abraham to do something, and then Abraham is faced with the difficulty, and we'll see how he responds to it. What does it mean that God tested him? Does that imply that God doesn't know without testing him what he will do?
No, it doesn't. He knew.
Well, if it doesn't, then how do you understand the idea of God testing him?
Because Abraham didn't know how he would respond.
Okay, what's going on here is something quite important. There's a difference between the definition of a test and the purpose of a test. The definition of a test is to reveal a characteristic that is otherwise hidden. That's what tests do. You put litmus paper in a liquid to test whether it is acid or base. It changes color, and you know. The potter who wants to sell his pots, and the buyer says, "They look fragile to me." Potter says, "Oh, you think they're fragile? Watch this." Holds up a pot, takes a hammer, and he goes, bang! Okay, now I see that. Now, did the potter know that they were strong? For sure. That's why he hit it with a hammer with full confidence. So he wasn't testing it in order to learn something for himself. The purpose of it was to show it to others. So when you say A tested something, it doesn't follow that A is doing it in order for A to find out something he doesn't know. The word test does not carry as part of its meaning discovering something that the tester didn't know. The word test carries as its meaning revealing some characteristic that is unknown, not visible. The person conducting the test may know it on other basis. When you are tested in an academic setting, the professor wants a visible sign of what's going on under your skull. That's what a test is. So don't read into this that God must not have known what the outcome would be or what Abraham's character was. That is not implied by the idea of a test. Now, God says to Abraham, and he says, "Here I am." Thanks a lot. Imagine that you get a call from someone who you haven't seen in 8 years. And, George, we haven't been in contact in 8 years. Tell me, George, where are you? And George says, "I'm here." Well, yes, he definitely is. I mean, that's certainly true, but it's not informative to you because wherever in the world he is, it's here for him. Saying "I'm here" says nothing at all. Here is an indexical, as philosophers say. So what does Abraham mean when he says "I'm here"? It's not locating his position. Hineni in Hebrew means "I'm ready to do your will." It signifies the readiness to do what you want. Okay, and he, God, said, "Please take your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Bring him up there as an offering upon one of the mountains which I shall tell you." Now, let's take on board an axiom which can be justified, that the text is maximally brief. There are no extra phrases that you don't need. And therefore, if something looks like an extra phrase, that's a challenge. You have to figure out what it's doing. What in verse 2 seems like extra verbiage which you could do without?
When God says, take your son, your only one, like as if Abraham didn't know he only had one son.
Well, actually, he has two sons.
Oh.
But leave that aside. You're on the right track, but you're not hitting the most extreme element in your train of thought. There's a much more extreme element here.
He says whom you love.
I mean, he says Isaac, right? So what do you need the descriptions for? The descriptions are totally superfluous. Once you're going to say his name, you've got it nailed. So just leave him out.
No, he's not.
Sorry?
I think what it's highlighting here is that this was the son. Abraham waited so long for a son, and then in his desperation, obviously he had a slave and Ishmael.
Okay.
And so it's just highlighting how much he loves his son.
Terrific. You're answering the question. But let's understand what the question is. If the purpose of the passage was to identify who it is, once you say Isaac, you've done it. All the rest of it is just wasted. So he says, that's not the purpose of the passage. The purpose of the passage is not just to identify, but it's to highlight who he is, to highlight the element of the trial that's going to be conducted. I think that's right. Some of the commentators say that. And I think there's an important psychological feature here. And it's carried out with the coming part of the story. When a person has to do something that's extremely difficult, stressful, one way to cope with it is just to turn off. To turn off your emotions, and go through it like stone. I don't wish upon you that you should ever get to know surgeons well, but if you do, you'll find that there are surgeons who are just cold. They're terrifically unsympathetic and insensitive. For some of them, it's a psychological defense. They handle life and death cases all the time. Some of them die. Sometimes they make mistakes. But to live with that, it's very hard. Some of them respond by just becoming cold, making sure that their emotions aren't involved. God is telling Abraham, I don't want you to carry this out that way. I want you to have in mind and experience and feel that he's your son, your only one, whatever that means, as we'll talk in a minute, whom you love, and is Isaac. All of that I want to be part of the experience. And that, as the commentators say, is why God commands him here, and he only gets to the place where he's going to carry it out 48 hours later. Because he has a 3-day journey, including 2 nights, where all night long you have nothing to do but sit and think about it. Sit and think about it. That means he didn't do it in shock. He didn't do it cold. When he finally got there and carried it out, it was a clear, definite, deliberate, fully experienced act. And that's part of what's indicated by these words here. There were hands up, yeah.
I was going to say, if the fact that they call it a test in verse 1, if he didn't say those details, you wouldn't realise why it's a test. Like if God said, take your son, the one who you hate and don't care what happens to him, you're going to realise it's not really a test.
But that's not what you offered. You started by saying if it didn't say those details. That paints the text as blank. You're now suggesting opposite details. That's not the same as not saying these details. The question, you're suggesting opposite details. But the opposite details are false.
No, so I'm saying if the opposite details were there, then it would contradict it being a test.
Correct.
So I'm saying that those details are necessary to prove that it's a test.
No. Again, the alternative to these details is blank, not opposite details. What you have to explain is why it isn't blank. The question is why these words aren't extra. Opposite of extra is erase them, not replace them with something else.
Because he wants you to understand why it's a test.
Well, maybe so, but then if you bothered to read the preceding text, the last 25 pages, you'd know very well who Isaac was and so forth and so on. You wouldn't need it. There's no news here. There's no news here that you don't know from previous.
I thought you were just taking these 2 verses on their own, but yeah, I haven't read.
Yeah, well, okay, I'm studying these now, but I can't do it in isolation. You don't quote out of context. That's why his remark, I think, is more to the understanding of the text in the context of everything else. I gotta say them, have this in mind. This is part of the experience. Now, when it says you're only one, it's a little peculiar because he has 2 sons. He has Ishmael, who's 13 years older than Isaac. When he says take your son, strictly speaking, that's ambiguous. He says you're only one, It's not obvious that that helps. Now Rashi makes a comment here, and I struggled with that Rashi for many years until I figured out that I was just reading it wrong. Rashi says, Abraham's response to your only one is, this is the only one to his mother, and this is the only one to his mother, because they have different mothers. Okay, but that's not what it says. It says, your only one. So why do I care that this is the only one to his mother, this is the only one to his mother? What Rashi means is, from Abraham's point of view, this is the only one I have from that mother, and this is the only one I have from that mother. So each one has a uniqueness to me, and therefore it doesn't fully disambiguate. Whom you love, and here the Midrash says something astonishing. He says, I love both of them. Now, in order to understand that, we need a little bit of the oral tradition. I'm bringing it in because you can't understand the words otherwise. Ishmael grew up, became corrupt. Sarah said, kick him out. And Abraham said, it's a terrible thing to do. God says to Abraham, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. Sarah knows what she's talking about. Do what she says. Obey her. So Abraham kicks him out. And he's gone. Now God says to Abraham, whom you love. And the comment is, I love both of them? How could that be? So here's what the Midrash fills in. Ishmael left. He got married and set himself up. Abraham kept track of him. He kept track of him and tested him from time to time. Either Abraham or an agent on Abraham's behalf came to where Ishmael is living. He was out. His wife was home. He asked her for some food. She said, get lost. You're trash. The agent comes back to Abraham, gives a report. Abraham sends a message to Ishmael. The son whom he threw out, he sends him a message. Your wife is not worthy of you. And he divorces her, gets rid of her, and marries again. Another test. Ishmael doesn't know why he got that message. He got the message, he threw her out. Married again, another test. The second wife fulfills the promise. She takes care of the traveler. Abraham sends a message to Ishmael, come home. Come home. This command comes from Abraham on the day Ishmael comes home. So yes, Abraham loves Ishmael. He always loved him. But now he's restored to him. And now God says, take your son. And Abraham says, which one? And your only one? Well, each one has a uniqueness. And whom you love? I love both of them. And then he's identified as Isaac. Yeah.
But that's not how the passage is written. So it's not, please take your son, and then Abraham says, which son? And then Hashem says, your only one. It's not structured that way. It's Hashem says, please take your son, your only one whom you love.
Well, how do you know it wasn't...
maybe I'm misunderstanding it, as in...
How do you know it wasn't the dialogue? Who told you it wasn't?
I'm
Yeah, the oral tradition fills in details that aren't recorded. That happens all the time. As I said, we start with an axiom which you can prove all over, that the text is maximally brief. It leaves out that which is not necessary for the story. This isn't necessary for the story. That's something that we can learn from. Okay, now interestingly, he says to go to the land of Moriah, one of the mountains that I will tell you. Now, if you look back to the beginning of Abraham's history that's brought in the written Torah, on page 55, Hashem said to Abraham, go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land I will show you. Also, unspecified. And the famous phrase in Hebrew here, in the top line, right in the middle of the line, is Lech Lecha, which they translate, go for yourself. I'm not going to work on that now. Lech Lecha. On page 101, the same phrase is there. Lech Lecha. And the third line in the Hebrew, the very end of the line, Lech Lecha. So the text is making this a kind of parenthesis around Abraham's life. According to the tradition, Abraham underwent 10 tests. And according to some anyway, the first test was leaving his native land, and the last test was sacrificing his son. So the text indicates a continuity between the two of them by using the same phraseology. Okay, Abraham woke up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac, his son, split the wood for the offering, stood up and went to the place of which God had spoken to him. Now, I want to let you in on a dispute between the commentators, show you how disputes work and how they're related to one another. Rashi says here, you see how precious the mitzvah from God is to Abraham. Abraham is a rich man. He has hundreds of followers, many servants. He saddled his own donkey, chopped the wood himself. Yeah, he saddled the donkey, chopped the wood himself. He's not willing to delegate any element in performing the mitzvah to anybody else. It's too precious to him. And indeed, he gets up early in the morning. As soon as it's light and he can carry out the command, he's going. That's what Rashi explains the text as indicating to us. The Ibn Ezra, let me just get the conspiracy. The Ibn Ezra says that Rashi has no right to that comment. Because the Ibn Ezra says, in the Bible, in the Tanakh, when it says A did X, it can very well mean that A had X done by someone else. A did X does not necessarily mean that A did X with his own hands and feet. He could have given it over to somebody else to do. And the proof of it is that in the book of Kings, it says that Solomon built the temple. Now, Solomon did not go to Lebanon to cut down the cedars, and he didn't weave the tapestries, and he didn't do the gold work. He had thousands of workers whom he delegated to carry it out. Still, because he was responsible for it, the Tanakh says that Solomon built the temple. So the Ibn Ezra says, you could say the very same thing here. When it says that Abraham saddled his donkey and chopped the wood, doesn't mean that he did it personally. He had it done by his servants. There are two responses for Rashi against the Ibn Ezra. Number one, people speak a language and they describe things. Descriptions often have figurative uses, metaphorical uses, allegorical uses. Usually from the context, you can tell what the person intends. When it says that Solomon built the temple, everyone understands that couldn't be strictly literal because it's not a one-man job. So you say, okay, can't be that he strictly, literally built the temple with his own hands. So what does it mean? Well, he's a king, he has lots of servants. He had it built and he takes responsibility for it. We understand that. But in a case where the words can be literally true, there's no pressure to take them figuratively or metaphorically. So it's not an obvious justification by saying that when it says Solomon built the temple, it means figuratively, that when it says Abraham saddled his donkey, it means figuratively. That's a jump. It's not obvious that you can justify it that way. Number one. And number two, why bother writing it at all? Who needs to know that? Who cares whether he saddled his donkey or not? Or somebody else saddled his donkey? Who cares whether he chopped the wood or not? Going to use wood, so it had to come from somewhere. Maybe it's scrap wood. Maybe somebody else. Who needs to know that? What am I going to learn from it? A text is maximally brief. If it tells me something, there's got to be some significance in saying so. Those two are points in favor of Rashi's explanation. Yeah.
But just because there's no pressure to think of it as allegorical, why should you automatically assume that it is saying exactly what happened?
Well, I think that's the way we respond to language naturally. You need some pressure to say that it's not meant literally. Almost always what we say is literal. And someone's going to say it wasn't meant literally, so you owe some reason for why, instead of taking it the way it's normally taken 98% of the time, that here I shouldn't take it the normal way. Right? And I think the preference, it's not, it's a preference, and then when you step out of it, so then you have to have some reason for doing that, context or some usage or word order or something. Somebody else said something. Yeah.
Can I suggest an alternative explanation for why it says he saddled his donkey?
But why it says that he did it himself? Yeah.
Without knowing too much about the context, if he asked someone else to saddle the donkey, to load up his son to go sacrifice, I don't know if he explains it here to the two men, the idea that he's about to sacrifice his son.
Yeah.
But I imagine if he did, they'd probably have some quite tough questions for him. So I just wonder whether he's almost trying to avoid having that conversation. Does that make sense?
Remember, Abraham is a rich man. He has hundreds of followers, if not thousands of followers, according to some sources. He's not doing this in private. He's not hiding. but there's no one to tell. As you'll see, the entire expedition is ambiguous. Its normal understanding would be that they're going on a trip to sacrifice an animal. And until they get to the mountain, nobody knows that that's not the purpose of the trip. Indeed, when they get to the mountain, Isaac says to his father, by the way, Dad, where's the animal? Because this was something they did very often. And if you're going to do it a distance away, you don't take the animal with you on a 3-day trek. You go, and then in the local market, you pick up an animal, and then you use that for the sacrifice. When they got to the mountain, and there's no local markets there, they're climbing the mountain, at that point, Isaac asked his father, Dad, where's the animal? Because he fully expected there would be an animal. So Abraham has nothing to fear from doing this in public.
So it's not like he got up early just to avoid seeing everyone on his trip to...
No. I mean, besides, it takes time to chop wood. Right? Yeah.
But note 3 says, definitively, he did this on his own personally, and there's a reason for it. Instead of, he ignored his personal dignity, saddled the donkey personally instead of having it done by a servant. It demonstrates that the zealous hasten to perform the religious duty, etc. So why? So should we read that and ignore it, or?
No, I think that's roughly what I said. I said because he finds the mitzvah so precious, he doesn't want to give it over to anybody else. He doesn't want to give it to anybody else to do. He wants to do it himself, just himself. Yeah.
What do we understand motivates Abraham to find a mitzvah so precious? What is it to him that he sees in his understanding?
Well, now maybe maybe my vocabulary has misled you. I would not think that it's this particular mitzvah that he finds so precious. Any mitzvah he finds precious. Any opportunity to serve God he finds precious.
But why is it? Because he's excited about being the father of a great nation, or
no, the creator of the universe.
How does he understand that? I
don't know what you mean.
Because he didn't have. I know they say he knew all Torah and everything, but I mean, what drives him? Is it just he wants to serve God?
I don't know if I can do this short in the context of this story, but remember, this is towards the end of his life. He's 137 years old at this point. Isaac's 37, by the way. Take that on board. Isaac is not a little lad. I passed over the vocabulary. Somebody said, and load up Isaac for the sacrifice. He wasn't loaded up. He walked along as an independent adult. And at one point, he's carrying some of the materials himself because their understanding is they're going to get an animal and they're going to sacrifice it, as they have done many times in the past. So, and he's had prophecy from God, and that prophecy come true. He had children in an age when it was impossible, and God promised that to him. He saw Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed just as God said so. When he was in Egypt and Sarah was taken captive, there was a plague on the house. He's had a lot of experience with God. This is nothing new. This is the top in a certain way, but there's nothing new here.
So it's like a pure motivation of love and fear of God.
Yes, and now I'll maybe we'll get to this. I didn't mention it in verse 2. God says, please take your son. That's a little peculiar. Why would God say please to Abraham? And the Midrash here has a comment which needs us to work on it. We will work on it when we get to the explanation of the sacrifice itself. The Midrash explains God as saying, you stood for me in 9 tests already. I want you to stand for me in this 10th test so that it will not be said that the first 9 were insignificant. I want you to stand for me in this 10th test so it will not be said that the first 9 were insignificant. Now, if you pay careful attention to those words, you'll see the commentators, and that's us eventually, have a double job. Number one, we'll have to see that this test is harder than the other 9. Somehow much more difficult. But that's not enough. It's not enough that it's harder. It's got to rehabilitate the 9 so that they shouldn't say the first 9 were nothing, insignificant. If the 10th is very hard and he stands in the 10th, you could say, okay, the first 9 were child's play, and it doesn't count much that he did those, but look at this. He really did something spectacular. So he's more spectacular than we thought. That doesn't rehabilitate the first 9. The critic could still say the first 9 were insignificant, but we now see how great he is because of the 10th. No, the Midrash says, stand for me in this test so they won't say the first 9 were insignificant. So there's got to be some ambiguity in the first 9 where the critic could say it's really like this, therefore insignificant. And once the 10th takes place, that disambiguates the first 9, or the critic himself will have to say No, I misunderstood. The first 9 are also significant. Not as hard, but still significant, not insignificant. We'll have to see how that works. Okay, next. Verse 4. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and perceived the place from afar. Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here by yourselves with the donkey, while I and the lad go yonder. We will worship and we will return to you." So everybody says, "What?" What did he say that raises your eyebrows?
Oh, he says, "We will return to you."
How about "we will return to you"? How about that? What's the purpose of this plan? The plan is to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. He's not coming back. Right?
They don't know that yet.
Right. They don't know that yet. So either he's just speaking to them in the language that they would understand, although you could ask, why does he say it at all?
He never lies.
I mean,
He never lies.
you're not going to get Isaac to go up the mountain.
Others, well, but he doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to say anything. He says, "Stay here with the donkey." You know, just stay there.
In the presence when Abraham was speaking?
Yes. Yes.
Maybe that was why?
Well, but again, the question, if they've done this many times in the past, right, so then the alternative would be just to leave it out, right? And one of the commentators here says something which is really quite surprising. He says there's such a thing for a prophet where a prophet speaks unknowingly, slip of the tongue, and God uses him to utter something which eventually will come true even though he doesn't know it. Plitas peh. Just something that comes out thoughtlessly, and because he's a prophet, it ends up coming true. Without that, it's not easy to explain exactly what the purpose of those words is. Yeah.
So would this be that he accidentally said something and then it ended up becoming true?
That's
or
right. That's right.
God made him say something without him realizing?
Well, okay, I don't know where to put God's causation in. It's a good question. I don't know exactly where to put God's causation. But the idea is, he says it. He's not taking real responsibility for it. It's not a premeditated lie in order to set their minds at ease, because he could have said nothing. Just said, wait here. Before I forget, some of you mentioned, the word lad in Hebrew is nar, means anyone younger than the main characters in the story. A nar can be 45 years old. Nar does not mean 16 years old. In biblical Hebrew, nar means anybody younger than the main people in the story. There's a place in Kings where they're out of war, and the general says, "Let's have 2 of the narim have a mock battle." They were not 16 years old. They were soldiers in the army. So don't be misled by the English translation of nar as lad and thinking that, they were talking about a teenager. That's not so.
It's a more appropriate translation.
I don't know if we have a word for it. The way it's used in the Tanakh is anyone that's younger than the main character in the story. Yeah.
Why couldn't you just assume that he means we will return to you? No, he's not saying we will return and Isaac will be alive. He's just not going to leave Isaac tied to a sacrifice stone. Just bring him back dead.
Because he's going to be burned up. I didn't say this, but when God instructs what should be done with him, he uses the word for a burnt offering. And a burnt offering is reduced to ashes on the altar.
You couldn't even bring back the ashes.
Well, okay. That would be, I don't know, that would be very extreme. And we were coming back because we'll put him in an urn on the mantle, like some people do. I had a problem at Johns Hopkins where I taught. In one of the buildings, there was an urn with the ashes of the guy who gave the money for the building. And there were Jews who were Kohanim. It was a question whether they could go in to take classes there because the ashes of the dead guy were, okay, yeah.
But on a related note, we're not allowed to cremate bodies.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Leave that. Okay, you okay? It's noted. It's on the record. Okay, now I want to tell you something which is really a bit astonishing. The verse 5, the English says, Abraham says to them, "Stay here by yourselves with the donkey." There's a rabbinic comment here. With the donkey. You guys, slaves, at least according to one Midrash, slaves, you guys are like donkeys. Stay with the donkey. You have an essential similarity to donkeys, to animals. When I read that first time, I thought, golly, It just says, stay here with the donkey. I mean, what are you building castles in the air for? Like, what else would you have it say? Stay here and watch the donkey because I don't have to run away. I mean, how can you build castles in the air like that? Many years later, I came across an explanation which you have to take from the book of Numbers. Take a look on page 859. This is independently interesting, and it will cast a light here. This is the end of the 40 years. The Jewish people on the border of Moab, and Moab is sore afraid. So the king of Moab wants a famous non-Jewish prophet called Bilam to curse the people. And he sends him a message. He says, I want you to come and curse the people for me. And he says, listen, I don't do anything on my own. I represent God. And he did. He knew God. He was a genuine prophet. That doesn't speak for his character, but he was a genuine prophet. So he said, wait here, and I'll wait for communication from God. God comes to him at night, 12, verse 12. And God said to Bilam, you shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for it is blessed. 0. Okay, Bilam gets up in the morning, and he gives an ambiguous message to the messengers, and they go back to the king, and they say, Bilam doesn't want to come with us. The king gets the hint, and he sends more dignified emissaries, more royal emissaries, to come and entreat Bilam to go. Says the same thing again. Me? You're asking me? I don't do anything. Until God tells me what to do. Come and stay overnight. We'll see what God will say. Verse 20, at the bottom of the page. God came to Bilam at night and said to him, if the men came to summon you, arise and go with them. But only the thing that I shall speak to you, that shall you do. Oh, maybe it pays to press God a bit. Okay, he said no. But, try again. Who knows? And now he presses. Bang, he gets permission. Right? Okay. 21. Bilam arose in the morning, saddled his she-donkey, and went with the officers of Moab. God's wrath flared because he was going. And at this point, the reader wants to call foul. Okay, now listen. God said no. Bilam tried again, and God gave him permission. Maybe it's not nice to push, but God did give him permission. Now he goes, and God's angry at him? How do you explain that? Answer is, you can't explain it in English, but you can explain it in Hebrew, because in Hebrew, the text isn't the way it's translated in English, or not exactly. If you look at, in the Hebrew, this is on page 858, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. This is where God says to Bilam, don't go. He says, Lo selech I mohem. Imohem is a contraction of im, heim. Im means with, heim means them. Don't go with them. Im, heim. Okay? Now, at the bottom of the page, 3 lines from the bottom in the Hebrew, at the end of the line, where he gets permission to go, it says, kum lech itam. Itam is a contraction, es, heim. When he told them no, he said, don't go, im, heim. When he told them yes, he said, you can go, es, heim. Those aren't the same thing. I'll explain the difference in a moment. They aren't the same thing. He was prohibited from going im and permitted to go es. There's no contradiction. Okay, what does he do? Look at the bottom line in the Hebrew, at the very end of the line, vayilech im. Im is what he was prohibited to do, and that was never taken back. The prohibition of im remained in force. He was only given permission to go es, and he went im, and God's wrath flared. The problem doesn't start in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's very clear. Now, what's the significance of it? The significance is this. The word im in Hebrew means to identify, to share goals, values, a worldview, projects, cares, concerns, affection. That's why a people in Hebrew is an am. Am Yisrael Chai. Am means people who are in one another, who identify with one another. Es carries no identification whatsoever. Es can be the most superficial possible connection. Okay, that's what you learn from this passage. That's literal. You can't escape that. Now go back to 103. So, verse 5 at the top of the page. Second line, Abraham says to the young men, stay here by yourselves with the donkey. What question do you want to ask? Which with? Which with does Abraham use? S or im? Okay, let's take a look. Third line down in the Hebrew, the very beginning of the line, po im hachamor. Im is the identification, sharing, worldview, values, goals, affection with the animals. Oh ho, that doesn't sound too good. This far I got by myself. The coup de grace was supplied to me by my chavrusa, my study partner. He said, turn back to the previous page. Verse 3. Abraham woke up in the morning, he saddled his donkey, took his 2 young men with him. What do you want to ask? Which with? Okay, look at the next to last line in the Hebrew. Vayikach shnei na'arav ito. He took his 2 young men with him. S. Now look what you have. These 2 young men, when they are related to Abraham, it's S. When they're related to the donkey, it's im. Related to Abraham, it's a superficial with. Related to the donkey, it's the intimate with. So you see that the comment of the rabbi is built on straight textual analysis. You can't budge from it. It's right there in the words. And not only that, but with this on board, you can explain something in 3, which I didn't comment on for you, but now you can see how it works. Look again at 3. He took his 2 young men with him and Isaac his son. No one would write that. You wouldn't write that. No newspaper reporter would write that. That's weird. You're scratching your right ear with your left hand. Why? How should it have been written?
I took Isaac with him, and the 2 young men.
The whole thing.
And the donkey.
Well, okay. I mean, it's a run-on. He took. How should it have been written? He took
Isaac, 2 young men, and the donkey.
with him. Yes. Why is it that the 2 young men are inside the with, and Isaac is outside the with? Is Isaac going by a separate route? Obviously not. They're all going together. He took his 2 young men with him, comma, and Isaac. It should have been 2 young men and Isaac with him. But you see, the with here is the superficial with. That doesn't describe Isaac. He's not going S, his father. So therefore, he's left outside. The text now is beautifully rigorous, beautifully exact, and communicates the idea that the rabbis said about the donkey in terms of straight text. There's just no avoiding it. There's a good example of how something can look like just meandering or just, filling the time between the aliyahs on Shabbos or just fanciful. And when you press it and study the text carefully, that's what you get. Okay, question.
Even in the Hebrew, it says Ve'et Yitzchak.
Good. Let's do that. The next to the last line on page 100. The word S has at least 2 uses in biblical Hebrew. 98% of the time, the function of Aleph Tuf is to identify the direct object of a verb. 1% of the time, its function is to say with. But the vast majority of the time, it identifies the direct object. So let's read the words. Vayikach, he took. Es, shnei noarav. The S there is the direct object of took. What did he take? He took the 2 young men. Ito is with him. Then, the ace and S are the same word. Pronunciation is only whether it has a musical note on it or not. But they're the same word. That ace is another direct object. And it's Isaac, his son, he also took. So the take has 2 direct objects, the 2 young men and Isaac. That's the S and the ace. In between, you have the ito. The ito is with him. That one is not indicating direct object because it doesn't signify a direct object.
No. So it's just a totally different word, like 2-2.
That's right.
So how do we know what the meaning is?
Well, from the context, if you have a transitive verb, then almost always you'll have an S afterwards to tell you what's the object of the verb. Here you have a transitive verb with 2 objects. Each one gets an S to tell you that it's an object. In addition, you have an ito that doesn't have that job because there's no other direct object to take. Ito means with him. And it's used that way all over, throughout the Torah. And in modern Hebrew also. Yeah.
Did Ishmael go with him?
There's two Midrashim. One Midrash is two slaves, and one is that's Ishmael and Eliezer.
Because if Ishmael did go, then he's referring to Ishmael.
Yeah, but that can't be. That's why I said it's two slaves. Okay. There are people who wanted to know about different size infinities. I think I could do this in less than or equal to 10 minutes. Point number one. Suppose you have a society that has no numbers. They have no numbers. How many cows do you own? Don't know. Lots. Now, you have a shepherd. He comes to take your sheep in the morning. You'd like to know when he comes back at night whether he returned all the sheep. Is there any way you could do that if you have no numbers? Yes. Here's how you do it. You have a sheep in a pen. The shepherd comes. Sheep go out one by one from the pen. As each sheep goes out, you put a stone in a jar. When they come back, as they go in, each sheep goes in, take a stone out of the jar. If when the last sheep comes in, you take the last stone out of the jar, you got all your sheep back. You don't have to have numbers in order to compare the sizes of groups. It's what's called a one-to-one correspondence in mathematics. You set up a one-to-one correspondence, you know they're the same size, even though you have no way of saying what the size is. That's point number one. Simple enough? Okay, now you can use one-to-one correspondence for infinite sets also, just as long as you make sure that the pairing works. So let's try this. Even in odd numbers. 1 is paired to 2, 3 is paired to 4, 5 is paired to 6, 7 is paired to 8. You can guess the next one. 9 is paired to 10. Go down forever. You'll never run out of odds on this side. You'll never run out of evens on this side. Every even will have an odd. Every odd will have an even. They're paired off perfectly. So we say those two sets are the same size because they can be paired off. Okay? First surprise. We can do the same thing with, on this side, all of the whole numbers. And on this side, only the evens, subset. Watch. 1 is paired to 2, 2 is paired to 4, 3 is paired to 6, 4 is paired to 8. Can you go on? 5 is paired to 10, 6 is paired to 12. Easy. 7 is paired to 14, right? You'll never run out of numbers on this side. You'll never run out of numbers on this side. Every number will have its pair over here. Every number over here will have its pair over there. So it turns out that the evens, just the evens without the odds, that whole group is as big as all the whole numbers, the evens and the odds together. That's surprising, but infinity is surprising. If you use pairing as your criterion, which you ought to, then they are sets of the same size. Okay, the size of the whole numbers is a certain type of infinity. Question, are there sets bigger than that? Infinities bigger than that? Cantor gave a general proof, and you can set up a whole hierarchy, but he gave an example which is intuitive, and I'll use that example. Yes, there are infinities bigger than that. How do you show that? Well, you say to the person, you've got a set Q of stuff, right? Let's see if you compare it to the whole numbers. If it's clearly infinite, and you compare it to the whole numbers, it's the same size. If it's clearly infinite, and you can't pair it because there's stuff left over, then it isn't the same size, it's got to be bigger. So, here's the set that he used. The whole numbers between, the decimals between 0 and 1. The decimals between 0 and 1. 0.5, 0.625, 0.33333, etc. All the decimals between 0 and 1. So, the challenger says, sure, I can do it. No problem. Pair them up. 1 gets paired to this decimal, 2 gets paired to that decimal, 3 gets paired to that decimal. Write down. Got all the whole numbers on this side and all the decimals on this side. All the I claim I have all of them. Cantor said, I'll show you wrong. I'll show you whatever pairing you pick up, you've left stuff out. You've not included all the decimals. So here's how he does it. He builds the decimal that's missing. Now, in order to make things uniform, since some of the decimals are infinitely long, like the decimal for 1/3 is 0.33333 to infinity, and ones that stop, like 0.5, add zeros. You don't change the values by adding zeros, so that all the decimals go out to infinity. Got 0.50000 forever, 0.33333 forever, and all of them. So here's the list. 1 is correlated with point something or other. 2 is correlated with point something or other. 3 is correlated with point something or other. All the whole numbers on this side, and the critic says, the challenger says, all the decimals are on this side. So Cantor says, I'll show you how to build a decimal you've left off. Here's how you do it. Now, let's see, when you build a decimal, first thing you do is you put a point. Point. Okay, now what digit shall I put in The first spot after the point. Well, go to your list, which you claim is full, finished, everything's there. Go to your list and look at the first entry. You got 1, and it corresponding to 1, there's some decimal or other. Takes the first digit in that decimal and change it. Add 1. If it's a 9, make it 0. Change it. Change it and put that in as the first one you're building. First digit of the one you're building. Okay. Now, second digit, you're building it digit by digit. What shall I put in for the second digit in the one that I'm building? Go to the second entry. Here you have a 2, and over here you have some decimal or other. In this decimal, take its second digit, change it. Add 1, if it's a 9, make it a 0, and put it in as the second digit in the decimal we're building. Can anybody see already why this is called a diagonal proof? 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going down the diagonal. You want to know what the third digit is in the one we're building? You could probably guess by now. Go down to the third entry. Here you have a 3. Here you have some decimal or other. Go out to its third digit. Change that digit and put it in as the third digit in the one you're building. And just keep going. Just keep going. The fourth digit, go down to the fourth entry. You got the 4 here, some decimal over there. Go to the fourth place, the fourth digit. Change that digit and put it in as the fourth digit. Now, ask yourself, is the one we're building identical to the first one on the list? No, it's different in the first place. Is it different from, is it identical to the second one on the list? No, because it's different. Is it identical to the 171st one on the list? No, because it's different in the 171st place. It's different from every one on the list. So that shows you no matter how you list them, you'll miss something out. No matter how you list them, you will not have gotten them all. That shows you that the decimals are a larger infinity than the whole numbers. And we did it in 8 minutes.
Would it be possible to